So let me begin by asking a question, right? So if I were to ask you, where do you do your thinking? If you look at yourself, where does thinking happen? 99.9% of the time, you're going to point up here, right? This is one of the biggest pieces of conditioning that we have gone through over centuries. The belief that the brain, this tiny piece of this organ that lies between your ears, is responsible for doing the thinking, and therefore we need to cram it with a whole bunch of stuff. And this is 100% wrong, right? Your brain is only one of the organs that is responsible for thinking, for what we call the intellect. When I looked at the title of this conference, The Embodied Leader, I was delighted. Because finally, it's almost like after 500 years in the world of being conditioned to believe that the brain is the epicenter of everything that we do, we are finally accepting that the body is part of that whole thing, right? So what do I mean by that? One of the biggest discoveries that took place in the last 25 years is that the neurons that are responsible for thinking, for the intellect as we call it, are not just present in your brain, but a large majority of them are distributed all through your body. In your stomach, in your liver, in your spleen, in your kidneys, right across the body. These neurons are working as hard and maybe even harder than your brain. What's the difference? The brain neurons collect information. So as far as data is concerned, yeah, the brain does a good job of picking it up. If you want to feel clever, the brain does a good job of that. If you want to be wise, and if you want to act with empathy, and if you want to come from a place of compassion that you heard right now, it's not your brain. There's a lot else going on in here. I'm giving you this preamble. Sorry, I'm just going to raise this a little. I'm giving you this preamble because one of the books I wrote in the last couple of years, I called it Re-Humanizing Leadership. And this came out in 2017. And the reason why I wrote that book was because I was looking at a world where AI was starting to dismantle everything as we know it. It began a long time ago, so today it's gone a longer way than 2017, of course. And I was, through my research and my work as an academic at Cambridge, I was beginning to be fascinated by the question, what is human? And what is a human going to be in 20 years from now? And more importantly, what's the role of the human in leadership? So going back to where I began today's talk, if you want to be clever, cleverness is something that is no longer going to be a place of competitive advantage, right? So all those things that make us clever, which is lots and lots of information, data, facts, this is not going to be a source of competitive advantage anymore. Because whatever can be done cheaper, better, and faster will be done by artificial intelligence. So when I take a look at what's going on in Silicon Valley right now, when I talk to my friends over there, the researchers there, they tell me that if you've seen something dramatic happening in the world of innovation and technology, you ain't seen nothing yet. The next 10 years are going to dismantle. That's the word I'm using, not disrupt, dismantle the world as we know it, the world of work as you know it, the world of interactions as we know it. It's going to happen. So the question that remains then for us to ask is, if machines are going to do things cheaper, better, and faster than the brain, which is the one that we use to be clever, what is our role and what's the role of leadership? And that's why I wrote that book called Re-Humanizing Leadership, because the answers I was getting was, as technology gets more and more intense, the demand on us to be more and more human is going to rise. Now that's ironic. What does it mean to be more human than you are, right? And a couple of crazy things that I picked up at one of the airports. I picked up a book called Permission to be Human. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because why do we need permission to be human? Where does that come from, that belief that to be human is something I've got to work hard at? The same year, and this was 2014, Harvard Business Review published a series of books called How to Be More Human at Work. And again, you wonder what's going on. Why do we need to be trained in being more human? Isn't that a no-brainer? Isn't that something we're all meant to know? And the answer is no, we're not all meant to know that. Because if you take a look at the history of work, just work, forget politics and forget everything else. If you take a look at the history of work, it's been a long history of dehumanization. In fact, when I started writing that particular book, I still remember it was a cold morning, and I wanted to find out if someone else had done similar work on rehumanizing leadership. And I began to type it onto my search engine, and I typed out rehumanizing. As I began to type out leadership, autocorrected it to dehumanizing leadership. My search engine was telling me what is more interesting for readers is not rehumanizing, but dehumanizing. That's where all the research has gone into. When you take a look at the last 20, 30 years of the kind of books that have come out, or the kind of myths that have prevailed. I'm from a different generation. I'm a lot more ancient than all of you. So in the 70s, I remember one of the best-selling books was Nice Guys Finish Last. All right? It became an iconic book. And what it was trying to say was that you cannot be a nice guy at work. You finish last. You got to be tough, you got to be brutal, you got to be, all those things. And these created mythologies over the last many years that still continue. Even today, for example, you walk into any leadership lecture or a seminar in any business school, on an average, men figure about 85% times more than women in leadership stories. In case studies. It's almost as if there is a gendered notion that we still hang on to, which says that men are more suited for leadership than women are. If you walk into any bookstore and look at leadership books, they reference men about 90% more than they reference women. We've got an issue, but fortunately the tide is turning. Fortunately, we are also living in a time when we are beginning to be aware, exactly as you watched in the video, of the need to be more human at work. So when I talk about embodied leadership, what exactly does that mean, right? What does it mean for me to show up as an embodied leader? Well, the first thing you got to remember is that it's not from up here. And I'm saying this because when I consult to a lot of organizations around the world, when there are a lot of men in the room that are talking, it really appears that they're all operating from here. Each one is trying to be more clever than the other person. Embodied leadership is not about being clever. Embodied leadership is about showing up as a whole person. As a whole person. To bring your entire self with you. And once again, when I say that, some of you might be wondering, but isn't that what we are meant to do anyway? No, we don't do that. We bring talking heads into meetings. We bring talking heads into our places of power. It's almost like we are embarrassed to be whole. And the time has come to set that right. To be a whole person means to show up in your totality. And I just want to give you 3 quick tips for it. And just so that you remember, I'm choosing the letter A for each of the 3 words I'm going to be using. Number 1, be awake. Be awake to what? Be awake to your sense of purpose. The story that you carry inside yourself. A story in which you're the hero. You're not just a bit player in someone else's story. You're the lead protagonist in your story. Be awake to that story. Be awake to who you are. Be awake to the reason why you want to do what you want to do. Being an entrepreneur is entirely different from doing a day job. You can do a day job in an organization without any passion or without any love for what you're doing. You can earn your salary and take it home. To be an entrepreneur, you got to own your story. You got to own your purpose. And by purpose, you mean, why am I doing this? What's the reason? What's my story telling me? What takes me back to my childhood where, as a young person, the early seeds of what I'm doing now were sown. And I'm still nourishing those seeds that I carry with me for the last 20, 30 years to be awake to that purpose. All right? The second part is what I call being aware. Be aware of who you are and have the courage to completely accept yourself the way you are, not try to be anybody else but yourself. And this is difficult. And it's getting more and more difficult with social media, where comparison and being critical of oneself is happening at a much bigger pace today than it happened before social media. Because the information is coming at you right away there. And I'm not on Instagram, but I think all of you must be. But my daughters tell me that, I look at what Instagram is, and it's a great tool. It's also a deadly tool. Because what it does is, it makes you feel smaller than the people who are trying to be bigger than you are. My time's up. Just give me a minute more. And that's about being aware. And the third thing is attention. Ask yourself, what am I attending to? Where am I paying attention? Right? What's my focus? Am I paying attention to what I really care about? Do I care about what I do? And if I'm paying attention, am I really caring about it? So I would urge you to ask yourself these three questions. Am I awake to my purpose? Am I aware of myself and the story I bring with me? Am I attending to the things that I really need to attend? Rehumanizing yourself is about becoming human. And I can assure you, I'm speaking as a scientist now, in 10 years from now, so many of the skills that people value in the intellect, remember I'm pointing up here, are going to become less and less important. There's going to be a huge level of redundancy in so many of these skills. What is going to be key are qualities of bringing your purpose with you. What's going to be key is how empathic you are. What's going to be key is how you inspire other people around you to do the work that they want to do, which means you make them aware of their stories and their purpose. When you do that, you are an embodied leader because you show up with passion. Thanks very much. I hope you got something out of this. I'm happy. Thank you. Write to me. I'm on LinkedIn. Okay, I'm not on anything else, but if you want to find me, write to me. I'm happy to share whatever else you want. Thank you very much.
LXMI.